Great. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome for the session on being an inclusive leader. This is one of the futuristic skill, and very few organizations actually have gone for trainings in this field. So I think Petcom Academy pioneered, and Vipul came up with this idea. I thought, let me give an attempt. So it's going to be a 21st century skill. We are familiar with the term D&I, and this is the I part, which is a challenge in most of the organizations, including ours. So and often people ask, what is the need? Why it is required? Well, just want to highlight that we live in a diverse business world. Let's look at the business perspective first. There is not just variability in our workforce, there is also diversity in the customers we want to attract. We share our messages using various platforms, various social medias. We want to plan to expand our business, different markets, emerging markets. Now, inclusive leadership helps balance all these elements. And these inclusive leaders, or such leaders, they will be able to adapt quickly to diverse scenarios, alternate perspectives with an open mind, non-judgmental mind, and to bring best results. If you look at globally, leadership comes in all shapes and sizes, all genders, all races, and yes, all with a different abilities to lead and inspire. With the changing demographics, it is important for the leaders to embody the cultural competencies needed to lead diverse teams. And it is also a requirement to do inclusively. I have some experience in cultural competencies. I have a global certification from US, and I'll try and bring the perspective of the culture, how it is going to help us in being more inclusive. Now, if you look at D&I, it is something new. English is the most spoken language in our country. And we have one of the biggest population globally which speaks English. But it is still treated as a foreign language. Similarly, D&I is a new concept, a decade or 2 decades old. But if you go through your own history, go through your own mythology, it is nothing new. If you look at, let's say, Ramayana, if you recollect, we had a maid called Mantra who always used to give negative advice to Kaikeyi, and which led to the 14 years spent in jungle of Ram, and of course he was joined by Lakshman and Sita. So that Banbas was Percy Mantra, who could not stand straight. Look at Mahabharata. Dhritarashtra, blind man. Mama Shakuni, who played a pivotal role, was limping. He had a problem with the feet. And you can see there are enough examples where people with disabilities or differently abled people have been part of the ecosystem, and they have had significant influence in the outcome. They have been part of it. If you go back to the history, I in fact recollect having read a book called Corporate Chanakya by Radhakrishnan Pillai, and he highlights the period of Chandragupta Maurya and some of the lessons to be learned. So one of the lessons I had seen there was something called inclusiveness of diverse population. Based on the strategy and the philosophy of Chanakya, Chandragupta Maurya, the king, and he was mentored by Chanakya, always had advocated and practiced the utilization of people like widow women or orphans or people having disabilities. They were used in a softer industry, weaving clothes, to do something else. So there was state's responsibility to take care of every population. That's what Kautilya or Chanakya advised, mentored Chandragupta Maurya, and who took care of it. So every society has taken care of D&I, even in the history, Indian history or Indian past, if you look at mythology. So somewhere it's not a new concept to us, but the Western world, as usual, brought it out maybe a decade or two that D&I is a new concept, and then we all have started aligning to it. Corporate India also has aligned to it. Before corporate India, at the time of British, this gained prominence. It's a part of our constitution. A lot of government regulations are on them, on how we can employ, give them equal opportunity. And of course, you have 377, where it gets an opportunity to even LGBT, etc. So those terms, I think we will discuss later. So the fact remains, if you really want to be inclusive leader, well, there's nothing new. You may already be an inclusive leader. So we will touch upon certain aspects where you feel there is a gap and where you could look at identifying these gaps and taking care of them. With that, as a backdrop, objective for the workshop for today, the virtual one, is to understand leadership. I will try and touch upon certain aspects of leadership and then redefine leadership through the lens of inclusion. Second is, we will have a look at D&I, what exactly is D&I, diversity inclusion, and this linkage with innovation and creativity. Then we'll also look at traits and competencies of inclusive leaders. And you could, check whether you have those competencies or you like to develop them. Fourth, we talk about best practices of inclusive organizations. Being an inclusive manager, what are some of the steps which you could do or you could take? We will touch upon micro inequities in our teams, in any teams, in any kind of a corporate, and how we can take care of that. And last but not the least, we'll also look at certain D&I initiatives within the organization. Since most of you will be familiar, I will just touch upon them, not get into details. Gordon Selfridge has very clearly defined the difference between boss and a leader. Last time when we had a session on managerial excellence, I talked about manager and a leader. Now let's look at the term boss and a leader. Often we use the term boss for our seniors, and we also use the term leader for our seniors. Let's understand what is the difference. And if you are a leader or you're a boss, this will give you a good insight. The boss drives people, the leader coaches them. Being a coach, I always feel every leader should be able to coach the team members. The boss depends on authority, the leader on goodwill, because he has universal acceptance. The boss inspires fear. If you don't do it, I'll take care of it. And the leader inspires enthusiasm. The boss says I, and the leader says we. The boss fixes the blame for the breakdown. The leader fixes the breakdown without blaming people. And last but not the least, the boss says, go, do this. And the leader says, let's go and do it. But that's what's the difference. And you can put yourself, where do you figure it? Why leadership? Often the question comes, we all are doing well, everything. So why leadership is required? Well, let's look at some of the captions. The truth is that no one factor makes a company admirable. There will be multiple factors. But if you are forced to pick one that makes the most difference, perhaps you will pick up leadership. There have been a lot of research on leadership. Since this is not a session purely on leadership, I'm not going to share all the details. Suffice to say, certain data I will share with you. The stock price of well-led companies grew by about 900% over 10 years. When you compare with 74% for the poorly led, that's the data from Institute of Strategic Change. Harvard Business School says the quality of leadership accounts for 15 to 20% of the total variance in the companies when you look at the performance. In case of removal of CEOs, Ineffective leadership in 73% of cases exceeded by basically by financial or ethical malpractices or mental or physical incapacity. So again, ineffective leadership took the prominence. So leadership needs to be defined. People have defined it in different form. Let's look at one or two perspectives. Peter Drucker says the only definition of leader is someone who has followers. Is the top athlete. I see some disturbance. Please try and mute your mics. Other than my mic, all mics should be closed. Leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. John Maxwell has written a couple of books on leadership, and this quote is from that book. He is an authority on leadership. He says nothing but influence. John Adams, one of the ex-president also from the United States, he says if your action inspires others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, well, you are a leader. The famous Chinese author Sun Tzu, who's written a book, Art of War, about 1,000 years ago, he defines leadership in a different perspective. It's a matter of intelligence, trustworthiness, humanness, courage, and sternness. So what is the leadership? Common question asked. Well, it's the state of mind, what you have. It's about your character, which you display and demonstrate. It's the vision which you have and which you're going to utilize for set your goals and to interact with your teams. It's your ability to create a bond. And that is nothing but inclusive within your team. It makes people work together. We all drive cars and we all engage gears. Now, these gears are synchro mesh with each other. And that's how when each gear starts functioning and moving correctly, the drive gets passed on to the wheels. Any gear non-functioning or where the teeth is broken, you will find the drive gets impacted. So you need to make people work together as if they're part of the gearbox assembly. Leadership is managing the diversity and inclusion, because unless you manage, and which has gained prominence, you just cannot move ahead and have a productivity the way you are wanting to do it. Let's look at certain traits of excellent leaders whom we see. And just a quick brush. Excellent leaders have what? Certain qualities and traits, you can say. A vision, a purpose, a clear goals, a strong commitment to do a task. They have that flexibility, and they amply displayed at the time of pandemic, and that's how we are back on the track from this perspective. Good understanding of a change, something I'm going to talk in more detail a little later. Active listening skills, absolutely very, very important. Some of you would have attended a session on business communication, and just wanted to share, if you look at communication as 100%, 45% weightage goes to listening. So any good communicator has to be an excellent listener. 30% weightage goes to speaking skills. So listening and speaking skills together account for 75% of communication. 15% goes to written skills and 10% to reading skills. And that is how we define communication, 4 facets: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. In our college and schools, entire focus is on that 25%, reading and writing. Nobody teaches you listening skills unless the soft skills classes have started in the engineering college. The fact remains, the 2 most important factors for a corporate functioning is listening and speaking, which is least covered in our schools and colleges or in our curriculum. And if you really want to become an excellent leader, this is important. Listening also becomes an important trait for an inclusive leader, something I'm going to cover in more detail a little later. Confidence to take risks, important trait. Let's look at what excellent leaders are. Well, they are quite knowledgeable about the total organization, their own subject matter. I'm not saying they are subject matter experts. They will have a good knowledge and they have a more robust knowledge about the entire organization, entire business model. Second is they are able to learn from their own mistakes. Is very, very important. They are excellent communicators, excellent listeners. They are able to speak with clarity and effectively. So we have highlighted listening skills, speaking skills, and very clear message. They are the realistic guys who understand the ground realities. And last but not least, they are capable to handle the DNI, the diversity and inclusiveness. So these are some of the traits of excellent leaders. I'm sure most of you attending the session will have most of them. And if there are gaps, this is the area where you need to focus. We will focus today for the day, for the rest of the time, more on handling the D&I part. And in fact, not even D, I'll focus more on I part. Most of the organizations today have been able to take care of D to a certain extent. They have a diversity strategy. They are into managing diversity. But the diversity here, I'll put it, is more on the gender, not the all kind of diversity we are looking at. And then inclusiveness is still a challenge. It is still a challenge. I'm going to cover for you some of the examples of inclusive leadership from around the globe, also as to how it works. Where it is said that it is vital that senior leaders proactively drive the company's D&I approach. And that's where inclusive leadership comes in. It ensures that leaders are aware of the personal biases. There are two kinds of biases, conscious and unconscious. So every leader must be aware of the biases. They should encourage diverse voices in the workplace. Companies like McDonald's, Deloitte, Salesforce, Google, P&G, Facebook, they all practice inclusive leadership. To a certain extent, our own organization has also got into the D&I part. The D is fairly well handled, and we will look at that. So why a robust and diversity, inclusion strategy is required? Because you need to have, buy-in, proactive involvement from company leaders, because then only things will become effective. Several companies are today exploring inclusive leadership models, which has embedded D&I principles into one's leadership and operating framework. And let's say, Deloitte has talked about 6 leadership traits that makes someone an inclusive leader. They talk about, the biases, preferences. They actively seek out and consider others' view. So basically, if you can say in simple terms that inclusive leadership is something like mitigating one's unconscious bias when you're interacting with the workforce or your team members, or when you're taking business decisions. So a senior stakeholder who takes advantage of a leadership role to ensure inclusiveness among teams in a jurisdiction. Through this, it could be your department, business, regional office, company, entire company. So a lot of organizations have done some work in this. Company like, I said McDonald's, etc. And today, you see the company's culture and employee experience becomes equally important. Earlier, the leaders were primarily tasked with operational growth, business success. But today, other factors also are required. A significant part of it is creating a thriving, inclusive workplace or a workplace environment. And that is how the leaders' inclusiveness and DI capability becomes very, very important to balance the business outcome. Let's look at inclusive leadership. How do we define it? It's defined as a capacity to manage and lead a heterogeneous group of people efficiently while respecting their uniqueness in empathetic, bias-free way. So we talk about the term empathy here, and you talk about the term bias. Absolutely bias-free. And as I said, there are two kinds of biases. One is your conscious bias, second is your unconscious bias. Take care of both of them. That is how we'll be able to define the inclusive leadership. Now, why inclusive leadership now? Well, as I said, we have already had in past. Now it is more structured. And that's the reason there is a need to have inclusive leadership. It is absolutely essential for every organization. So apart from cultural benefits, inclusive leadership also has a tangible impact on your bottom line. There's a Deloitte research which says teams with inclusive leaders are 17% more likely to be high performing, 20% more likely to make better decisions, and 20% more likely to have better collaboration. So in a nutshell, inclusive leadership thus boosts productivity, creates better congenial environment, and have much better bonding within the teams. Emotionally and culturally intelligent leadership has always been vital, but today it's more vital than ever. You have seen the pandemic, you have seen how the lockdown happened, and you have seen what the resilience had an impact. So the leader's resilience and flexibility in the dance of change. Why is a dance of change? We understand it's a VUCA word, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And you cannot have a single benchmark or single yardstick. It's a dance of change. You have to have flexibility in your approach, in your thinking pattern. You have to be creative. You have to be innovative. You have to have different perspective. Your own perspective may not be suitable. So you have to have diverse perspective. You have to be inclusive of that diverse perspective to handle the dance of change. Second is, we look at the geopolitical and organizational demand. These demands test how we respond to difference. What are the geopolitical significance? Really, you have seen Indo-China conflict, Indo-Pakistan conflict happening every day. The Galwan Valley incident, how India reacted, how India has it has impacted business, your Make in India initiative, your defense preparedness, your missile policy, your armament, adding policy, anything you talk about. India's association with the Quad nations, India's association with Middle East, or let's say with Russia. All these have geopolitical ramifications. It is going to impact our business. So from this, or let's say we talk about indigenous production, Make in India initiative, self-reliance, and reducing reliance on external things, external stakeholders. So that is how you have to think about the difference. Sometime back, I had covered it earlier also, when the lockdown happened, and instead of importing mask and IP from China, the government of India decided to go for indigenous development. A lot of people came in. Our own company, Alok Industries, did a fantastic job. So apart from producing more than a lakh kits per day and giving them to our people at 1/3 the rate, they also started exporting. It created an avenue. Similarly, lot of defense-related industries today are exporting, looking at exporting aircrafts, exporting tanks, exporting armament, missiles, weaponry, and earn money. That's how our reserves are going up. Today, maybe somewhere around 580 billion or something. The reserves are going up. Economy has started kicking up, and things are moving. So somewhere the inclusive leadership definitely has an impact on it. Third is there is a growing intolerance at the waste of talent. Now, what happens if you're not an inclusive leader? You may have a talent, a lot of talent, and they are not utilized. You have taken your decisions the way you want. So there is a lot of waste. People may get fed up. Some of them will leave. In any case, today we have intolerance for a waste of talent. Non-inclusive leadership also leads to a very slow pace of change because people are not involved. People want things to move, but since they're not involved, they will not move the way it should be. Your decision making gets impacted. And that's the reason Inclusive leadership is absolutely relevant today, and it was relevant in past, but today is more prominently required. And we need to take care of this challenge, which is a challenge in every organization. Now, how we are doing in organizations globally. Let's look at some of the global perspectives. So, playing at the edges to more playing on the field. So that means you have less action, maybe more in like in a policy or a less service, but it's doing at the edges. Certain organizations, not everyone is focusing. So while some organization like Deloitte or you talk about McDonald's or so and so or Facebook or so and so is doing, but is everyone? Perhaps no. Can something be done? Yes. So from a global perspective, something is not the way it should be. Organizations have gone for diversity strategy, a change in set of principles for leading edge organizations. It has come on. Implementation, well, it is still a question mark. There's a McKinsey's data which suggests that success rate of change programs is just 26%. That means there's a failure rate of 74%. Why? Because inclusive. I'm sure everybody is familiar with something called bell curve, because when it comes to your grade, annual grade, and what grade you get, your leaders and your HR managers, they sit together, identify and try and utilize the structure called bell curve. Well, bell curve had been utilized maybe 1 or 2 decades back. Our entire HR system came into prominence in corporates maybe 50, 60, or 5, 6 decades ago. But the bell curve is more than 100 years old. It was actually a change curve. And I have covered it earlier in our change management session, but just to reiterate, in any kind of a change, 10 to 15% people always support a change. 10 to 15% people always oppose a change. And 70 to 80% population is neutral to a change. If you are able to influence them, or if you are able to include them, your change becomes successful. But if the people who are opposing the change, if they are able to include them or have the inclusion with them, the change becomes a total failure. One of the best examples is Maruti. A few years ago, when their management wanted some change, the union leaders and those people, they made sure that the majority of employees did not okay the change. Management had tough time. In fact, people lost lives. Police firing, etc. Was done to control the mob. So a lot of unpleasantness took place. You can read about it in Google and get the more details. More focus on inclusive culture and a behavioral change. Everybody is looking at, but it is taking time. It is needing more and more effort. There are organizations who have created posts for a DNI head of DNI, diversity and inclusion. They have created a chief culture officer post. Organizations have gone for that extent because they are valuing it and they are feeling that this needs to be done. So a lot of new things are happening globally, and impatience for change because it's a mindset change. And so not a mindset change just for your own mindset, it's also about others. Whatever mindset, you may have a fixed mindset, or you may have, let's say, a biased mindset. And this is where you need to, if you really want people to be included, you have to have a mindset change. Your opinion, your assumption, your judgment has to be changed. Let's look at DNI. Whenever we talk about the term DNI and some of the efforts organizations make, it is superficial. What we do, in case it's all, we look for more of a gender kind of a DNI or inclusion. So if you have, let's say, in a team, 5 male members, the manager or the leader will feel I should have 1 female also, or maybe 2 females also. So what do you do? Internal posting, try and get someone. That's not a DNI. You're not addressing diversity. That's not true. That is one small component of diversity. If you have to understand diversity, there are a lot of books on DNI which is available. You have a lot of articles. The more you read about it, the more clarity you will have it. It's a 90 minutes. I may not be able to cover everything, but just to give you a flavor or a perspective, DNI could be diversity could relate it to your personality. To diverse personality. So I remember I have used a tool called MBTI, Meyer-based test indicator. It gives me 16 facets of personality of a human being. Like to give an example, you could have certain introverts and certain extroverts. You get a score called ESTJ, like I'm an ESTJ. I'm an extroverted person, high on sensing, high on thinking, and high on judging. So that's my trait. So similarly, there are 16 parameters. When you take an MBTI assessment, you get to know. So personality could be one of the factors for diversity. You cannot have everybody extroverted in a team. You have to have a combination of extroverts and introverts when you form a team. And that's where the inclusiveness will get impacted. So when you look at diversity, look at personality, look at gender, male, female, everybody's aware. But are we have only two genders? No, we also have LGBT. We have other factors. Ethnicity. A lot of American firms, a lot of European firms, there's ethnicity issues. It is there in our case also, perhaps not getting addressed. Sexual orientation is one of the diversity issues. Nationality. I remember when I was part of the RPMG and J3 was getting implemented, we had people from 26 nationalities working with us, different culture. Some of them different language, of although English, united everyone, but different food habits, different way. I recollect, and I have covered it in etiquette also. When you meet an Indian and you want to shake hands, the distance you are required to maintain is 12 inches. Some of us Indians, we come as close as 6 inches. When you meet an American, the distance you are expected to maintain is 18 inches. When you meet a German or one of the Europeans, especially German, Swiss, or that kind of a people, what they expect you is to maintain a distance of 24 inches. I have seen in RCP, some of our managers getting closer to the Germans or Europeans, and they took a step back because they felt their personal space is getting infringed upon. Language is also a barrier, and it's also a case for diversity. We need to take care. The language is commonly accepted and spoken, which is understood by the entire team. My own experience with Larsen & Toubro in Chennai, when I joined them as head of L&D. Now, majority of the population in Chennai, in Larsen & Toubro was Tamilians, few North Indians, and few people from different, southern states. What was the common language everybody spoke was Tamil. And if you didn't know Tamil, you didn't understand anything what's happening. But that's not the problem. Because the leaders never bothered for the inclusiveness. People just came and they talked about it. So language is a barrier and it's a element for diversity. You need to take care of that. Age. Today in Reliance, you have a young engineer at 21. And yesterday I learned that, in fact, yesterday or day before I learned that we have certain senior leaders who have worked for 50 years in the organization. KPN, I think, one of them. So let's say he joined at 22 and worked for 50 years, he must be around 70 plus. And that's the kind of age difference we have. Age Davada may be 80 plus, 80, 85, and they are still employees. So you have a difference age plus a diversity factor. Disability we talked about. There's a factor called religion. Then you talk about family status. Right. Somebody could be married. Someone could be unmarried. A person could be divorcee. A person could be single child parent. A male member, but so anything, there are different family status. Then you talk about organization. level. 2011, when I joined Reliance, there were three groups. You had leaders family, you had managers family, and you had individuals. That's all. And then we had organization change, the grading structure came in, and multiple grades got created. But those rank and status still remained. So today, in a particular grade, you may have same, two level of people. Let's say in a G grade, you may have a vice president, and you may have a associate vice president. And you may have one vice president at a G level and another vice president at the F level. So all kind of structure difference. It could be function. You have sales guys, different kind of a diversity. You have supply chain, definitely a different factor. It impacts your diversity. Location specific, or the contract type of employment, contract, non-contract. Somebody is a consultant, somebody is a full level employee. So these are some of the factors which can be considered for a diversity. Let's look at inclusive. It could be engagement. How engaged employees are. It could be respect, which people expect from leaders, from team members, from senior juniors. It could be certain leadership behaviors that gets demonstrated. It could be functioning within the teams. How people work, how they function, what are the kind of congenial environment, etc. Are you as a leader including your team members? Are you demonstrating the right leadership behaviors? Are you giving respect? Are you engaging your people? Are you throwing open constructive challenge? You're open to discussion or debate. Are you open to constructive criticism? And I can go on. All these factors are nothing but inclusive. And that's where the leaders have to focus. They need to understand, are they doing it? They need to evaluate, they need to identify gaps, and they need to work on them. That is how you will be able to take the journey of D&I in the right perspective. Let's look at leadership of difference. Now, inclusive leaders definitely display certain qualities. It's quite different from a routine leadership. Certain current challenges to leaders. And the first one I say is to become fluent in the language of difference. It is very, very important. We need to be fluent. Speak in the language which people understand. Because communication becomes very, very important. Second is start with self-awareness. Somebody is talking on a phone, please switch off your mic. It is wrong etiquette. Please switch off your mic. Start with self-awareness. What are my culture norms? Am I abiding by them? What are my preferences, cultural preferences? What are my biases? What are my prejudices? Am I aligning? Am I taking care of that? If I am doing it, it is great. So first thing, you have to start with yourself, your own self-awareness. Are you handling your own leadership method rightly? Notice more, watch people. Be curious to know about difference. Reduce your judgment. Reduce your assumptions. Try and be more curious to know, learn. That's how you're going to increase your knowledge horizon. Your knowledge base is going to be increased. Then widen your leadership style. It could be situational. Being a coach, I always say every leader should have the capability to coach team members, including the cross-functional teams. And a leader needs to practice that collaborative style, because ultimately you're looking at the best productivity. And collaboration is one such style of leadership, a collaborative. It's a kind of I will use a term called shared leadership. I'll give an example here. I don't know how many of you have watched a movie, but even if you're not watched, it's something I recommend. If you really want to see an inclusive leadership example, please watch a movie called Force 10 from Navarone. I have given the example. This movie was made based on the World War II scenario, and it's a sequel. The first one is Guns of Navarone, and second is Force 10 from Navarone. So Guns of Navarone, what you see is a German gun which was interfering with the movement of British ships, and they made merry hell for the Britishers. And the gun was very difficult to be destroyed because it was hidden between the mountains, a cut in the mountain. So aircraft bombing, etc., nothing worked. So ultimately, the British decided to send a 10-member team, which is called Force 10, and they raided this gun place, the place where the gun was, and ultimately destroyed the gun. Now, the best part is they could have sent a 10 commando, but no. It was a very inclusive team, a diverse team. There were 2 women. There were a black sergeant. It was headed by a white colonel, and it was a diverse team. And each segment of the operation, the person who was an SME took a decision. So that's what they brought in, the concept of shared leadership. Like when you had to, navigate through a jungle because they were paradropped, and thereafter they navigated in jungle in night. So the person who was familiar with the terrain and who was best suited, he took a decision. Usage of explosive, the person who was best suited, he took a decision, and everybody abided. So there was a lot of issues within the teams, but ultimately, and not everybody returned alive, but ultimately they were able to achieve the task. And that was a diverse and an inclusive team, one of the fantastic examples to see how a team functions. Inclusive leaders, what do we actually mean? Well, self-awareness of the preferences of your team members. Right, so we always say that be aware of your team member, know their strength, weakness, opportunity, threat. So we use a term called SWOT, do a SWOT analysis, but this is something beyond SWOT. You are aware of the preferences of your team members. Second is curiosity mindset. Openness to learn. Something curious to know something which could be in the interest of team, in your own interest. Second is empathy. Empathize with your people. Put yourself in their shoes. There's the 2 terms, empathy and sympathy. I'm not meaning sympathy here, but it's pure empathy. Put yourself in the shoes of your team member, of your other stakeholders, of your customer, in case you're wanting to empathize with the customer. Understand his mindset, understand his perspective, understand what impacts him. And that's how you should be able to demonstrate inclusive behavior. Then we talk about listening. Third level, absolutely deep listening. So while I have already emphasized that listening has a 45% weightage in your communication, here we're looking at the top end of listening, absolutely deep listening. You do not hear words, but you listen. Something like, Socrates, when he was running an institute, one of the Greek philosopher. So what he used to do, he used to ask the students to tie a cloth-like object. Whole day, he didn't allow the students to speak. They only had to listen. And only towards the end of the day, when they were supposed to eat food or discuss something, that's time they were permitted to speak. The rest of the time, they just were not told not to speak anything, just listen. So that is how the deep listening gets practiced. It's very, very important. Skillful questioning. So there is a Socrates way of questioning. It's an open and close-ended questioning. And there are other ways. We can have questions, direct one, indirect one, or open or close. What is the purpose? You want to gain an insight. You also want to have a feedback exchange. You give feedback, you take a feedback. And we always say feedback is the breakfast for champions. So if you're really looking at inclusive leadership, the skillful questioning gains prominence. And last but not the least is the communication, communicating clear message, using meaningful language, which gets understood by the people. If your audience does not understand a language called English, and you are an excellent speaker, but in that language, it will be of no use because the communication may not happen. So you need to speak in the language which your audience understands. It will be very, very important to make people understand. You may have best of the English. You may have a command on the language, on the vocabulary, but it will be of less use unless you're communicating clear message using the right language. So these are some of the facets of inclusive leadership. What we mean and what we could do, take care of that. I'll show you a term called curiosity and judgment. Often we have a biasness and we judge people. The moment you look at someone, you say, even it happens in an interview, a candidate comes to you, if you're a leader and you take your decision within first 15 seconds. Look at his shoes, you look at his face, you look at his dress, you look at what kind of etiquette, etc. he's displayed, little bit he speaks, and the first impression you create in 15-20 seconds. That's why we say that in an interview, in a job interview, your first impression becomes very, very important because all subsequent impressions are basically it's an add-on or it's a reduction. So people by nature are judgmental, and so are the leaders. So while it is, and the moment you judge someone, you meet someone, you say, I know he's not going to speak sense. He's going to talk nonsense. So you will never be curious to know or curious to, ask him more questions because you have made your judgment. You have your own bias or you have had your own assumptions. It could be based on certain diversity. It could be any kind of a diversity. Like a moment, to give an example, when you move on a road, you're driving car, the moment you see a lady driving, you're slightly cautious. Why? Because you made a judgment. Ladies are poor drivers. And if you see a L written or learner written in a bold red, you will be double cautious. You will not be curious to know who is this lady, which is this car, how is she driving, because you've taken a judgment. So somewhere, you need to have the right balance because your judgment may impact your curiosity. So right balancing is required and something where as an inclusive leader, you need to take care of that. We talked about empathy, how empathy is important and it really impacts. So there is something called 3 stages. Let's look at that. First thing is tune in to others' agenda. Don't keep having your own agenda. Tune into others' agenda. They may be having something different. And try and establish that emotional connect. It can happen through content. It can happen through your demonstrated behaviors. So emotional connect, emotional content has to be there to somebody else's agenda. And you find and even coaching brings that. Coaching very clearly says never give solution. Always try and establish a emotional connect and make sure that the person whom we are coaching uses his own content, not your content, not your views, but it comes from him. And through a series of questioning, Socrates or open-ended or closed-ended or whatever tool you use to try and help him reach a decision. Second is acknowledge their positions, their emotions, so that person feels, yes, somebody is bothering, somebody is taking care of it, and they feel motivated. Third is align your message to resonate better with them. It has to be in line with his or her agenda. Even if it doesn't comply, at least should resonate well. By no means I'm saying that you have a sympathy or always agree to someone. No, it doesn't mean not a sympathy, not always agree. It should resonate and it should have a logical reasoning. That's where, so we talked about something called influencing skill. I remember I conducted a session. So that's where your persuasive influence comes in and you are able to connect. And that's how you will be able to express empathy with the other stakeholder. how do we best support and challenge our leaders? We all are individuals, and we need to support our leaders. I recollect when the HR transformation happened in Reliance, I was one of the change agents selected by the BP team, and ultimately I took multiple sessions, multiple interaction with leaders, just to make sure that the change ethos input reaches every employee, and we are able to take a larger population. And that's where we talked about the bell curve. We have a persuasive influence on the larger population, and we are able to include them in the change effort. So if you are a change agent, which I'm sure you will be, when you interact with leaders, you have to inform the leaders what we are already doing, how we are doing it, what we are doing, where are the gaps, and how could we engage leaders on the journey and help to open minds. Certain leaders may have a closed mind, may not be aligned, may have a fixed mindset. Typically we use a term called hardwired people. They may be hardwired based on their own perception, own ideas, own way of functioning, own thought process. Somebody said, I recollect, I've been in Reliance for 40 years. We have always functioned like this. Now, why trying to bring in change? So you have to deal with hardwired people in a different way. You cannot deal with everyone in the same way. So similarly, these change agents, it is important for you to take care of your leaders, make sure that they align to the change, and you're supposed to be able to get their best of their support, because they need to be convinced. And if they are convinced, they will be able to do better in their journey for the change, which is nothing but it is leading to better inclusiveness. I talked about the six signature traits of an inclusive leader, and this is from Deloitte. This input has come. One of the company which pioneered the concept of inclusiveness in a modern corporates. And what Deloitte says is the first one is the cognizance, because biases is the need. Somebody's talking. Can you put your phone on microphone on my mute, please? That's a request. कौन बात कर रहा नहीं? Dr. Verma here. Can you put your phone on mic on mute? This gentleman, you have to put your phone. You're disturbing others. So the first point is cognizance, because bias is a leader's actions. HL was one of the famous warrior of the Trojan War. If you look at the Greek mythology and the Battle of Troy, etc. So this was one of the greatest warrior which the Greeks have ever produced. Now, what happened? In his case, his mother had, when he was a child, mother took him to the river, I think Styx or something was the name, and dipped him in that holy river. So his entire body became non-vulnerable. But the mother was holding the feet, one of the feet, the heels basically, both the heels, I think, and that could not be dipped in water. Otherwise, he would have got to be submerged. So that became a vulnerable piece in his entire body. So when the enemy started shooting arrows or a spear on Achilles during the war, nothing used to happen to him. But his heels were the vulnerable part, and that's where when the arrow was hit at the heels, he was killed ultimately. Same thing happens with Duryodhan. Those who recollect the Indian mythology, Duryodhan's mother Gandhari, she had put kind of an oil in his entire body, and when she was putting it, she had worshipped God, and the God had given him that. So Duryodhan's body was becoming like a stone; nothing could be touched. But Shri Krishna, one of the movie I saw, it says that Shri Krishna or a girl comes in, and she comes. Gandhari was, of course, blindfolded, so Duryodhana was not bothered. So when this girl comes in, a young child, and Duryodhana sees, so he doesn't allow the mother to touch his private parts or even the thighs, and that remained the vulnerable part of this great warrior. So during war with Gada Yudh with Bhim, Bhim tried the level best, but he could not create or do any damage to Duryodhana. At that time, Sri Krishna told him, and he hit the gada. It's for hitting below the belt, where on the thighs of Duryodhana, and that's how Duryodhana died. So, but because that became the vulnerable part. So, similarly, for any leader, any cognizance or not knowing your own biases becomes the Achilles heel. It's become the most vulnerable part of a fantastic leader. Second is curiosity, because different ideas, different experience enable growth. So the more curious you are, the more inclusive you will be as a leader, and you will be able to achieve things much better in your professional life. Third is the commitment. Inclusiveness helps you stay on the course. It becomes tough. So when you are inclusive, when you are interacting with a diverse team, you find you get committed. And your commitment takes you on this course, which becomes your third signature trait. Look at the fourth one, collaboration. Diverse thinking team is greater than sum of its parts. Good collaboration, I give you certain data, HBR data, which says a diverse team, a good collaboration team, or inclusive team, the productivity goes 20% more than a normal team. So inclusiveness, especially collaboration, becomes a very important component, and that's how it is a signature trait for an inclusive leader. The fifth one is courage, because taking about imperfection is not so easy. Taking care of your own imperfections, taking care of your own shortcomings, talking about it, agreeing to it is a high risk. Not very many leaders will like to expose himself. They'll take it as a personal risk. And you need to have a courage of conviction to tell your team members, I'm sorry, I don't know this. I'm here to learn from you. I'm here to understand. Can we discuss this? Can you support me this? So that's what is the courage of conviction. And that's what make you an exclusive leader, inclusive leader, right? Last but not the least, one of the area is culture intelligence. Not everyone sees the world through the same cultural framework, not through the same cultural lens. So it is important for us to understand the culture difference and align to the difference in culture. Unless you do that, you will find that things will not be working. So you have to be culturally smart. I recollect, my certification on cultural intelligence gave us entire new perspective, right from your food habit, the way you dress up, the way you talk, the way you speak, the way you welcome, the way you shake hands, and the kind of the population, ethnicity, everything gets covered in the culture. Culture is not something which gets built overnight. It is something which is done over a period of time. So if you're looking at a leader making an inclusive environment, first he has to understand the culture and build in the culture together. No individual makes a culture. It will be collective built up. Culture is nothing but a way of life, which we start doing over a period of time. When we are a child and when we grow up, how our parents, how our elders support us, and something becomes part of me, a part of us. So that ultimately starts becoming a culture. Like respect to elders, you touch feet. There are certain inherent part of your culture. To a Westerner, it may not be relevant, but for us, for Indians, especially in certain communities, it's absolutely relevant because it's a part of the culture. So you have to be culturally intelligent, and you have to be sensitized to all kind of cultural difference based on your composition of your team members or your stakeholders. To give an example, today we are dealing with business in multiple people from multiple culture orientations, and you have to be sensitized to their culture. What does this culture mean? Otherwise, it impacts your business. I'll give an example. One of the American company had put in a tender which was shortlisted for a Japanese firm, and they wanted to close the deal, so they were asked to make a presentation. So the CEO decided to send the best foot forward, the head of the sales. The guy was an excellent orator, excellent presenter. He and his secretary, they flew in. They're so confident, so optimistic that they reached the day they reached. Next day morning, they were supposed to make a presentation, and it was a Friday, and they were so confident that they had booked a return ticket on the Friday night. They thought they'll make a presentation, they'll sign a deal, and they'll come back and they'll give the good news to the CEO. So Thursday they landed, and Friday morning, early in the morning, the head of sales was to making a presentation. This was, I think, 1 million worth of business, more into a supply of timber and wood, etc., to one of the Japanese firms. Presentation was fantastic, excellent. What oratory, what slides, everything was nice. Well, he expected a response. It was a 45-minute presentation. Japanese, if you look at the culture, there's something called high context communication culture, where the Japanese are at the top of the shelf, followed by Chinese, followed by Indians. And what is that? Indirect. Low context is direct. Germans are the most direct people. You ask them, can you do this? He'll say, no, I cannot do it, or I can do it. You ask an Indian, he'll say, I'll try my level best. So it's more related to the cultural context of communication. So herein, the Japanese did not give a response. In fact, they were just mulling individually, thinking. So this American felt a little offended, and he said politely, any queries, any doubts, any clarification. Again, culture difference. Japanese didn't speak up. So next time this guy got a little irritated. And then he says, have you guys followed something, or do you want me to repeat everything? Words to that effect. And that time, one of the Japanese lifted his head and said, thank you very much. We will get back to you. This American, slightly demotivated, but still, he had that arrogance that he is such a good speaker, and these Japanese don't understand, that kind of a feeling. So he came back Friday evening, had a gala time on Saturday, Sunday, partying, etc. And Monday morning, when he comes to office, he was given a pink slip by the CEO. The CEO had received a communication, they lost the business. Why? Because this leader was not culturally oriented. He was not culturally sensitized. He didn't have that right cultural intelligence of the customer. And that's how a business got lost. So these are the 6 signature traits of an inclusive leader. I'm sure you would have captured them. Another representation: cognizance, curiosity, cultural intelligence, collaboration, commitment, and courage. The 6 signature traits. And why it is, we've given it here. Cultural intelligence, because not everyone sees the world through the same intelligence framework. Right, so this is what the 6 leadership traits. It's a Deloitte document. Let me give you a little more elaboration on the 6 signature traits of inclusive leader. And there are 15 elements. So the 6 traits gets converted or gets further divided into 15 elements. So when you talk about commitment, every leader looks at the commitment as a trait from personal values and has a belief that it has impact on a business. It makes a business case. The leader has the courage to accept mistakes. So he wants to display that humility, he needs to display that humility. And he also has to have the bravery to take risk. Then you talk about cognizance of biases, self-regulation, understanding, have a fair play. I'm going to cover more details in subsequent slides. Curiosity, that openness you talk about, the perspective taking, the coping up with the ambiguity. We talked about the VUCA environment. Cultural intelligence, the drive, the knowledge, that adaptability. And last but not the least is collaboration. That empowerment we talk about, the teaming within teams, the voice you are able to give to your stakeholders. So that's how it becomes a 15 elements out of 6 traits. Let's look at the element of commitment. The first one is a signature trait, commitment. So what an inclusive leader think about personal values? Well, they want alignment of personal values to inclusive, definitely. And what do? They treat all members with fairness, respect, understand the uniqueness of each member, take action to ensure each member feels connected to the group and organization. proactively adapt their work practices to meet needs of others. So here the leader adapts. That is what is important. Of course, the team members will also do. When you look at the business case belief as an element, where the commercial values of diversity and inclusion with respect to talent, innovation, customer, new market growth, all these become very, very important. So treat diversity and inclusion as a business priority. Such leaders, this is what they do. They take personal responsibility for D&I outcomes, clearly and authentically articulate the values of D&I. They allocate resources toward improving D&I within the workplace. Today, if you look at your own ecosystem, you will know how many leaders are taking care of this. Just look at the second signature trait, courage. Element is humility, humbleness. What inclusive leaders think about it? Well, is awareness of the person's strength and weakness is the requirement. What do they do? They acknowledge personal limitations and weakness. They're not perfect people. They're no perfect leaders. They seek the contribution of others to overcome personal limitations. They admit mistakes when made. Second is bravery. Being an agent for change and positive impact diversity and inclusion can have. So what do? They approach diversity and inclusion wholeheartedly. Entire heart goes into it. They challenge entrenched or national attitude practices that promotes homogeneity. The guys who are not having inclusive behavior, they hold them accountable, which is very, very important because that's how you are able to build the culture. Let's look at the third one, a signature trait called bias. So what are the elements? Self-regulation and fair play. Let's look at self-regulation. They accept the biases and the concern for its impact. And they also understand the moments when they are most vulnerable to a bias. So what do such leaders do? They learn about their personal biases, including their feedback. They do self-evaluation, take a feedback, and take corrective steps. They follow procedures or processes to ensure personal bias do not influence decisions about others. Because let's say you have to, grade people within your teams, and you have a bias about so and so. If so and so is not a good worker, or so and so is not, has been listening to me so well. That should not impact. So you already have assumption and a bias. Identify and address organizational processes that are inconsistent with merit. Yes, it is there. A lacuna is a gap everywhere. And you need to identify and make sure that we promote meritocracy. Let's look at the element called fair play. Awareness of three features of fairness: outcomes, processes, and communication. So make as a leader, what you could do is make fair and merit-based decisions about talent. So with respect to your promotion, rewards, task allocation, etc., be as fair as possible. Employ transparent, consistent, informed decision-making process about talent. Whatever you're making, whatever changes you have done, try and inform them in advance so that everybody is aware. Provide, those who are affected, you can give them a clear explanation as to why a decision has been made and give your logic, reasoning also. Look at another, signature trait, that's curiosity. So it has three elements: openness, perspective taking, and coping with uncertainty. So leaders think about is their own limitations, value of new and different ideas, experience, etc. So what do? Definitely a demonstrated desire for continuous learning through training, attending training, seminars. A lot of leaders think that they are beyond training. They know everything and they're able to handle business. No. So learning is a continuous process. Even at 70, if you continue learning, your brain will remain exercised and will be in your interest. Actively seek the perspective of diverse others in ideation and decision making. Because if everybody agrees to you, you are cloning ideas. So what you should encourage is look at, especially when you're doing ideation, decision making, the diversification of the views are required. Withhold your fast judgment when you're engaging with diverse others. You should not reach to conclusion that these guys are not thinking the way I think, so something is wrong. I don't like them. Perspective taking. Enhance one's own understanding of new and different perspective. How do you do that? And what do you do that? Well, you listen attentively when somebody is talking. Engage in respectful and curious questioning so that you are able to understand their viewpoint in a much better manner. And demonstrate ability to see things from others' viewpoint. That's where I use the term empathy. Empathize with them. Understand their perspective. Uncertainty, yes. Accept that some ambiguity, uncertainty is inevitable. We are in a VUCA world. You cannot have everything crystal clear or listed down. Because if that be so, then human beings are not required. You will be needing computers can do the thing. You feed in the data and they will do the work. So as a leader, you need to cope effectively with change, demonstrate and encourage divergent thinking, because we are not looking at colliding of ideas. Seek opportunity to connect with diverse range of people so that your ideation becomes better. That's what is curiosity. Let's look at the fourth trait, the cultural intelligence. Now, again, this trait has three components, three elements: drive, knowledge, and adaptability. So what do the leaders think about? The personal or organizational benefits of learning about, or experiencing different culture. They understand is beneficial. And what do? They take an active interest in learning about others' culture, seek out opportunity to experience culturally diverse environments, confident of leading cross-functional teams, cross-cultural teams, seek information on local context, especially when you're traveling, like politics, ways of working, certain food habits, eating habits, etc. Difference of similarity between cultures, you need to understand. Relevant country-specific knowledge. Before I give an example of, the Japanese and the American. So especially when you're going to different geographies for dealing with businesses, economic knowledge, etc., we should be very clear. What is adaptability? Acceptance that different culture situation may require behavioral adaptation. So work well with individuals from different culture backgrounds. Change your style appropriately in case you have some cross-cultural encounters as is required. Both verbal and non-verbal, you have to use appropriately based on the culture requirement. So whether when you talk about verbal is your speed, how fast you speak or how slow you speak, your tone, your silence, etc. Non-verbal, your gesture, posture, facial expression, eye contact, all these becomes very, very important in a cross-cultural encounters. Another trait we talked about, collaboration. Again, three elements: empowerment, teaming, and a voice. So what do the inclusive leaders think about it? Well, they ensure that others feel able and comfortable to contribute independently. And what do? They give team members the freedom to handle difficult situations. Don't, something you delegate or it's a difficult situation, don't try and influence everything. Let the team member handle it. Empower team members to take decisions about issues that impact their work. Hold team members accountable for performance they can control. But give them so when you delegate a task, when you do something, make sure that you do not interfere. Allow people to take decisions. Look at the teaming element, being disciplined about diversity of thinking in terms of team composition, processes, etc. So whenever you form teams, well, always assemble teams that are diverse in thinking. Work hard to ensure that team members respect each other. There are no groups within the teams, outgroups, etc. Anticipate and take appropriate action to address conflicts when it occurs. The voices we talked about, adapting styles and processes to ensure every team member has a voice. So a safe environment where people feel comfortable to speak up. Explicitly include all team members in discussion, especially when you have meetings, etc. Make sure that this happens. Ask certain follow-up questions in case you need a clarity, and you also get an opportunity. If somebody is not spoken, maybe you can ask certain questions, the person will be happy to give a response. Today, we are a new world order, a diverse new ecosystem. So there is a diversity of market. Now what happens? The demands are shifting to emerging markets. There's a growing middle class. By certain data which I came across, by 2025, the existing strength of middle class, which is 1.8 billion, will jump up to 3.2 billion. So that's the biggest growth. So your entire focus, customer focus, especially in retail and other segments, will be aligned accordingly. There is a diversity of customer. Customer demographics and attitude is changing. Empowered through technology, the customer base expects better personalization of products or services. And it also impacts your competitors and your competition. Third is diversity of ideas. Digital technology you have today, hyperconnectivity, deregulation, and these are disrupting your business value chain. Nature of consumptions, your competition, all these are getting impacted. So diversity of ideas becomes very, very important. Another factor is of the new world order is diversity of talent. Look at the shift in age profile, which is happening today, from 21 to 70 or 70 plus. Education level, expectations. You have Gen X, you have different generations within our business, different expectations. They all expect equality of opportunity. Some expect work-life balance. All this will be impacting the employee population, and that's where inclusiveness of the leader is required to manage the new world order. And last but not the least is the diversity of technology. At the rapid pace the technology is getting changed. You need to integrate, and by the time you're able to integrate and train people, the technology changes further. So that's what is the new world order. Absolutely, VUCA, absolutely. And on that, top of that, with the geopolitical implications, with so many things happening globally, internationally, things are moving at a really fast pace, and you have to live with that. What can organizations do? Well, they can do strategic alignment, how you function. I remember when we were part of the RPMG, and when the floor team came in as a project managers for J3, there were a lot of gaps between Reliance leadership or RPMG leadership and the floor leadership. And one of the tasks given to me as academy head there was to bring in an alignment. So we sat in a 5-star hotel for a period of I think 1 day for 5 hours at the leadership level, and then it was done at a business level. 2 organizations, Reliance and L&T, similar thing. Strategic alignment was done. All kind of an alignment. So basically, you do a strategic alignment with your teams, your people, with your organization, with your stakeholders, so that everybody gets aligned. Right recruitment of a right BNI, and we have discussed this. Attitudinally, these people should be right. You may use certain psychometric tools, etc., to get your right talent fit. Capability and competency management, inclusiveness should be part of any competency framework, especially at the leadership level. Identify the capability, identify the gaps, and take care of it through your intervention. Performance management, we discussed this, that it is every inclusive leader has to have a non-biased approach, manage it well, whether you use a 9-box matrix or any matrix, make sure that you have a robust performance management system. Reward and recognize those leaders who are inclusive. And that is how we'll be able to build the culture. Systems integration, absolutely essential, because the more you have systems getting integrated, you find the individual biases will start getting reduced. But it should not happen that we run totally in an autopilot mode. Human touch is required. Ultimately, it's man behind the machine which is going to make a difference. A lot of focus organization can do on leadership development. I believe this is the first session on inclusive leadership. There are some digital content available, some inputs you can get from them. More and more people need to be taken through inclusion, diversity, and that's how we are able to build. We will be able to build a robust culture for inclusion. Elements of inclusion quickly, three things: fairness and respect, value and belonging, and confidence and inspiration. So let's look at fairness and respect. It's a fundamental element that is underpinned by the ideas about equality of treatment and opportunity. A lot of people always feel that we do not get equal opportunity. So as an organization, we say we are equal opportunity employer. So are we only in principle or are we in practice? A call needs to be taken. Value and belonging, individual feeling that their uniqueness is known and appreciated, while also feeling a sense of social connectedness and group membership. Now, as a leader, if you measure the ability of a fish by its capability to climb a tree, you are a wrong leader. Because fish is excellent in water, as a squirrel is excellent in climbing a tree. Your team will have a squirrel and fishes. You will not have only squirrels, and you must not have. So when you have so you need to identify what is the uniqueness, what is the strength, and as a leader, you need to leverage on that. That will make you a true inclusive leader. Third is the confidence and inspiration. Creating conditions for high team performance through individuals having confidence to speak up and the motivation to do their best work, etc. That is all will help you in becoming an inclusive leader and help you create that congenial, inclusive environment for your stakeholders and for your teams. Quickly, let's look at 7 pillars of inclusion. And the first one is access everyone to the leader, to the ecosystem, to entire thing. Accessibility is the first part. Second is the right attitude, the positive attitude, which we need to display, both leaders and of course team members. But here we are focusing more on the leadership part, inclusive leader. You have to give people a choice. You cannot put your own choice. So the choice should be there. Get into the collaboration or the kind of partnership so that you have the best of the ideation. Right communication, focused communication, to the point communication, and transparent communication. Absolutely essential. And in the language which people understand. Communicate well, practice good listening skills so that the two-way communication improves. Should have a policy. Most of the organizations have gone in for a policy, D&I policy, but it should be not only policy, it should also be practice. And last but not the least is the opportunity. So we may say we are equal opportunity employer, and you as a leader, you may feel you are giving equal opportunity. Make sure that you have no biases and you give opportunity. Let's say in a team, you have earmarked someone to only prepare minutes. So maybe you like to rotate, maybe you like to do something different. What qualities of inclusive leaders? Well, they are loyal ambassadors to a D&I. They never miss a chance to spread the word of D&I and significance. They accept they are vulnerable and they show it. They combat old-fashioned paternalistic leadership style. They're aware of their own biases, challenge their own habitual patterns. They're excellent communicators. They're curious. They're good listeners. They understand and adapt to various cultural norms. They are excellent team players, eager to help and do what's best for the team. Not individual interests, but collective interests. Certain strategies to promote inclusion, educate leaders, something what we are doing council within the organization and have the right team. When you talk about D&I head or you talk about the inclusion council, it's not a must that only you focus on agenda. Most of the organization, they get a lady and they make her a D&I head, that she is a female and she is handling a D&I. That's not the right approach. It could be a male, it could be anyone who has the right skill set, right competency, right knowledge framework, and right will to take it further. Why D&I initiative fails in organization? Because the people whom you appoint to lead are not the right people. They're not having the right skill set. Forming an inclusion council, every organization should do. This is really a good strategy. A strength-based approach within your teams, identify the strength and work on that. Celebrate employee differences. Employee success we have been celebrating. Let's also start celebrating differences. Listen well to employees, multiple mediums, and that is how you should be able to get them. Whether you do a poll survey, whether you have face-to-face conversation, you have a social media, but you need to listen to them. Hold more effective meetings, give opportunity to everyone so that people are able to vent their ideas and you as a team are able to benefit out of that. Communicate goals well, have your clear defined strategy and then measure progress. That is how we'll be promoting inclusion. Being an inclusive manager, 6 actions which I recommend. The first is interact with your team members more often. Make your team members feel comfortable when you are talking to them or when they are talking to you. Know more about your personal life of your team members, but draw a line. Don't get too much involved. Avoid speaking in your local language to team members, something I share my L&T experience with you. Do not let your assumptions cloud your thinking. So be very clear on this and ensure that inclusion is not intrusive. So you have to draw a line, and that's how you will be a good inclusive manager. We'll also quickly talk about certain micro inequities, way in which individuals are either singled out within teams, or they are overlooked, or they are ignored, or they are discounted. Yeah, so and so is not good. So you have all kinds of assumptions. Certain examples I can give you. Avoidance of eye contact or rolling out of eyes, including a select group of team members for every critical project, critical work, etc. Cutting down on ideas before they can be considered. Yeah, I understand. Cut somewhat midway. Repeatedly asking only one member to take minutes of meeting. Or deliverables from one person gets triple checked by you, but while from others, they aren't. And there will be many other examples of micro inequities. Something what you need to take care of that. Last input, the D&I Charter Inclusion Practice and Reliance. You're already familiar, a lot of things happening. Somewhere, on the website, I could get something called 5E framework, which Reliance has written in D&I Charter. And it talks about educate, sensitize, and develop capabilities to foster an inclusive environment. So there, I'm not sure whether we are having so many initiatives to educate and sensitize leaders and people on the capability part. Second is encourage, visibly increase support of internal and external stakeholders. Third is enable support from infrastructure practices and policy. Policy practices, I'm sure we'll be having those kind of support. Provide an inclusive experience to all employees. So you will be able to know what all the inclusive experience you are being given. And if there is scope, maybe like to highlight and tell them. And effectiveness is create, measure, monitor, report, and benchmark the current inclusive practices at Reliance. And of course, there are there, etc. There are a couple of initiatives. But inclusive D&I does not end at Women's Day celebration. And you get a group of ladies, do some event function, give them some gifts, etc. No. So if you're really looking at D&I, then you look at the entire gamut of D&I. Last but not the least, to conclude, to summarize, inclusive leadership is the capacity to manage and lead a heterogeneous group of people efficiently while respecting their uniqueness in an empathetic, bias-free way. It is authentic leadership style that rules out discrimination, bias, and a favor based on color, race, gender, other protected characteristics, and allow employees to feel valued for their own input. Folks, with this, I come to an end, and I'm open to questions, if any. Anyone? Any questions? You can directly ask or give it in the chat to Vipul Angalia.
Yes, sir. Jitendra Gupta is asking how to motivate a team member who is very isolated and does not connect with other team members to become a team player?
Yeah. Okay. So one is, I give an example of a fish and a squirrel. The person may be a fish and the rest may be squirrels or monkeys. So you need to identify the strength. You need to identify, and we did talk about your team meetings. Make sure that every member speaks. If a person doesn't speak, through a series of open and close-ended questions as an inclusive leader, ask the person. You have group activities, team activities, pair up people, ask them to make presentations so that they will work together. You could create trials. Certain tasks could be shared within teams. Ask people. Ask people to be more, give out the ideas. So have a compulsory ideation within your teams. Let people give ideas. No, see, remember, no idea is a bad idea. Everything is good. Yes, all may not work for you, but at least you have an idea. So be open. And that is how we can look at every member in the team getting, taking care of the unique capabilities and aligning them to the team functioning. Because unless everybody contributes, you will never have a very productive team. And of course, watch that movie, Force 10 from Navron, you will get more insight. I did conduct a training on building high potential teams. So there were certain traits, etc. I talked about. There also we had talked about the diversity is one of the key factor for any high productivity. So that is how it works. As a leader, you need to get involved, make it open, be aware of your own biases. You may be favoring someone else. You may be getting a response from someone else. Somebody is a very good worker, but are you giving equal opportunities to everyone? So that's where a lot of hard work comes with inclusive leaders. And that's where you need to really focus. Thank you. Anything else? Anyone? Yeah, so I'm done from my side.
Yeah.
Anyone who wants to share anything, any leader or any questions, I'll be more than happy. Else we can close with it.
Yeah. Any questions? Okay, then we will conclude the session. Thank you, Dr. Verma, for this excellent session on this inclusive leadership. This is the first time we have organized this topic, and it is a highly required skill for any leader in corporate life. And thank you all for joining this session. Total 81 employees joined today. Many of them were leaders. Thank you.
Okay. Any leader who wants to share anything, any senior leaders who wants to share something on some of the D&I practices, what they're doing, that'll be good to know internally also what we are doing. Anyone. We can spend another 5 minutes.
Amit ji is there, Amit Chaturvedi.
So why don't we request Amit to come on board and share some of his Reliance D&I activities? That'll be help rest of us to learn from Amit.
Okay.
Amit, are you
Dr.
there?
Yes, Dr.
Amit,
Verma.
so let's have some input from you, Amit. Nice to see you there.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Verma. It was a really very nice session. Extremely informative.
Thank you.
And Vipul pulled me in. I'm actually, in a way, kind of blessed in a manner that in our team in supply chain, we have quite a lot of women in terms of leadership positions.
Okay.
We have Rachna, we have Geeta, we have Shamen. So in terms of gender diversity, in terms of women leading from the front, I think supply chain group is a primary example, and it's been a real pleasure to be working with them, because they have a different style. They're kind of, most of the time they're more human. they take a very different view compared to we the men. So and that, as you said, the diversity in terms of relating to people, etc., it comes naturally to those leaders. So and we also, like, I mean, we also need to be attuned to different requirements of different people. And as you rightly mentioned, at so many places, that we have to be sensitive to different expectations and different ways the people look at the things. That's what I would like to say.
Thank you. And the excellent points, very nice points.
I think Pratik Nanavati is also there.
Why don't we request Pratik to share some?
Pratik sir, will you share your thoughts on this?
I can't make out. So Pratik, if you're there and like to share something, I'll be more than happy to listen some inputs.
We are not able to hear Pratik.
If he's speaking, I'm not able to hear. Doesn't matter. Anything else, Vipul?
No, sir. I think
Okay.
he's on mute. So
Okay, you might be on mute.
Yeah, let us conclude the session.
Okay, absolutely fine.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for this session, and thank you all for joining this wonderful session. Thank you.
Thanks, Vipul.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.